Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to KAWO's October program. I'm Noelle Osen, president of KAWO, and I really want to welcome you. It's nice to see many familiar faces and a few new ones. How many, if I can ask quickly, how many non-KAWO members do we have here this evening? Could you just raise your hand? That's about half of the crowd. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Just a very, very quick announcement before we get to our program for this evening, which is going to be very interesting on invasives as a resource. Next month, we're doing our annual elections for officers and members of the executive committee. And I thought really quickly tonight, now I have not warned the other members of the executive committee that I was going to do this, so I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I do want a couple of people to stand up so you know who our officers are. I have a feeling that for many people, you really don't know who the executive committee members are, except for the one who stands up here every month. So our vice president is Quinn Edwards. Quinn, would you please stand up? Quinn, of course, is our liaison with the Portage District Library. We thank her very much. And Gail Simmons is our secretary. She is not here just this minute, but she's going to be here in a little bit. Is Margot Rebar here, our treasurer? Is she not here yet? Okay. So those are elected positions. Then we have 4 elected positions at large, and that is Beth Bradburn, Mike Weiss, Mel Luna, and Jessica Hagan. And where is Jessica? There's Jessica. Okay, thank you. And we also have a number of people on our board as voting members who are chairs of our various standing committees. I'd like to go through these just quickly so that you know who is doing what. Our program committee chair is Mel Luna. Community projects, we have co-chairs Paul Alexia and Paul LaFerriere. Outreach and education is Jessica Hagan. Wild About Monarchs are Carol and Mike Klug and Ilse Gebhardt. And hospitality is Kathy McGough. She's with us every month. You see her. Site visits, we have co-chairs Dave Wendling and Ann Klobuchar. And Ann's here this evening. So thank you. I just wanted you to, if you have a chance, introduce yourself to those folks, get to know them. You should know who the people are who are making the decisions, who make these programs happen. So with that, I will ask Mel if she would get up here and do this evening's introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle. And thank you all for coming. This is a special night for me because, yes, I am the chair of the programming committee, so I get to make decisions about who gets to do the programs. And lucky for me, I have a very old friend I've known for over 30 years who is an amazing naturalist. And when I think of someone who loves the natural world, George instantly comes to mind. He is an incredible storyteller, an incredible person. I can't brag on him enough. I think you'll all enjoy getting to meet him tonight. And yeah, he's an outdoor educator. First and foremost, he's a lover of the natural world and all the creatures therein. So please give a warm welcome to George Hedgepeth.
Well, after that, it's all downhill, so I'm going to say thank you, folks. I am not a specialist in invasive plants. I am not you guys. However, I am part of a Venn diagram and that we have an overlap. What I am is I'm a specialist in useful plants, things that we can use. I also have a little bit of a philosophical bent in some of this, and I'll throw some things out. And the last thing I'll say is I have seen some terrible brouhahas break down about invasive plants, including 2 really sweet-natured, mild-mannered guys almost get into a fist fight last year over a debate on control of invasives. And yeah, I didn't want to be part of that. But and I love them both. But passions got hot. So if I say something it's a curveball, feel free to give me your perspective. I know the way this is set up. There's a microphone here and all that. So if you've got something to say, put your hand up. I'll repeat it and address it. I really do want this to have some two-way traffic back and forth. And for one reason is I'm not a specialist in invasives, but I've assembled a list of 13 plants. I think 11 of them are officially invasive in Michigan. 2 of them may or may not be, but they're pretty close to the definition, and they are in other places. So with that, I want to, is that? Let's get out of my face a little bit. So with that, I want to think about, first of all, the definition I'm going to use for invasives is a plant that is not native to an area, to a biome, that is problematic. Now, that's about as wide a net as I can throw. You can debate that, narrow it, maybe widen it even more, I don't know. But that's what we're going to go with. There's official lists from different state, entities and all that, but let's just stick with the rough and dirty one for now, and we'll see if that works. So I sometimes see people who are involved, especially if it's the part of their job in invasive control, they get an idea almost that their enemy are these plants, that the plant is a bad plant. Well, it's not. It's not here because it chose to be normally. Normally, it's invasive plants generally get a foothold where there has been environmental degradation and there's a toehold for them. And they happen to be plants that are badass competitors, and so they get in there and do it. Just same thing with invasive animals. If something has a place that can get a toehold, it will. So it's on us, I think, to not give it toeholds. And once it's there, we got to live with it to the best of our ability. If that means eradication, great. If it doesn't, if it means accommodation, well, we work on that. And if it means just admitting that we got beat, we can do that too. But if we're going to be destroying plants, this is a little bit of the philosophical part. It seems to me like viewing something that had no intent of causing us problems as some kind of an enemy isn't healthy for us inside, and also it kind of disrespectful because things have their place in the universe. Whether we misplaced it or not, that's a whole different thing. Now, I don't want to go long into that because that gets into some swirly stuff that's way out in the weeds, so to speak. But what I want to talk about is how do we take these things from being nothing but our opponent and we find a way to make them part of our lives a little bit? How are they useful? So some of the uses I want to talk about are maybe more esoteric than others. Some of them are maybe something that you might never do, but I want you to understand that they're a resource nonetheless. So the first one I want to talk about, it doesn't have a ton of uses that I'm aware of, but it's a plant that I've learned to really have a problem with myself because I watched what it did to a lot of woodlots over on the east side of the state, and that's the bittersweet. I'm really tired of seeing that pull the crowns out of trees. But if you got to live with it, if you can't eradicate it, or as you're eradicating it, and of course I'm not benefiting doing things that are going to spread this stuff, but those young bittersweet, you can make really cool porch furniture with them. You can weave them into fencing. There's a lot of neat things you can do, arbors and things like that, where bittersweet can become kind of something that you can do something with. And to me, I mean, maybe it's a little morbid. Maybe it's like displaying your enemy's head. But if you can do something useful with it, I think it's a better situation. Some of the plants are a lot more immediately useful than that. The other one that people get a lot, the one I see a lot of angst over, at least where I'm at, is garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is a noxious weed in our definition easily. It's an edible. Now, a lot of people will pick the leaves and they'll say, I heard this is edible, and they'll eat it. Like, it's kind of good. It tastes like a dandelion with garlic in it. It's bitter and garlicky. The shoots, are you guys familiar with the term the meristematic portion of a plant, the meristem? It's the growing portion of the plant. When you go to get asparagus, the part that snaps is the meristem, okay? That growing bud. The meristem of garlic mustard is nice and fleshy, looking and the leaves aren't out yet, those shoots that look like little skinny asparagus shoots are the far best part to eat, except for one other part. And if you go in the early spring, and I'm talking like March, right after snow's out, and you find a patch where you know that there's garlic mustard, and you scratch around like a turkey, you'll find the tops of the roots where they're right on the top of the surface of the ground. The root itself is white, but on the good ones, the tops are purple, like a turnip or a radish. And if you get those roots, wash them, put them in a food blender and set it to like nuclear annihilation, and then hit it with a little salt, a little white vinegar, you've got the best horseradish condiment you've ever had. It's fantastic. It's not just okay, it's really good. It's a good sharp horseradish with a significant garlic note. You put it on a roast beef sandwich, you'll thank me. So the nasty little devil that we all deal with has got some uses. And of course, the other one, if you want a little bit, yes, sir. No, it is. But when people just eat the leaves, they usually find them a little disappointing.
Okay, I've made garlic mustard pesto.
Yes. And if you want to do something really neat with garlic mustard pesto, take a turkey or a turkey breast with the skin on, cut little slits, inject the garlic mustard pesto under the skin and roast the turkey breast. Boy, that's pretty fancy fixings. And the cool part is it turns the outside of the turkey kind of green. So if you got kids in your life, you could tell them it was a Martian that you caught. If you take the seeds of the garlic mustard, and good Lord knows they produce enough seeds, if you take the seeds, you can indeed grind them up into a brown mustard. And if you want it to look more yellow, add turmeric. That's what they do with commercial mustard. So garlic mustard as a mustard condiment, takes a little work to get them ground down like you're going to want them to be. It's worth doing. A baby food jar of that'll last you 6 months, and take an afternoon to make, and there you go. Now, did it do anything about getting rid of the garlic mustard? Not really, but look, you're stuck with it. You might as well do something enjoyable with it. Next thing is autumn olive. Everybody likes to hate the autumn olive. Autumn olive is a fruit just to eat. A lot of people find the astringency that it has to be a bit off-putting. I don't know, man. I grew up eating a lot of things like that, so I don't find them weird at all. Is there anyone here who has not tried ripe autumn fruit? To me, they're super prolific, right? They make a ton of fruit. You can actually take a container and rake down the branches and fill it, and then just pick the leaves out when you're done. Autumn olive fruit, to me, tastes like 80% strawberry, 15% cherry tomato, 5% I had chemo, and I get little air bubbles in the brain sometimes, and I forget what I'm saying. God dang it, it's not gooseberry, currant. A little bit of currant flavor. It's got a small astringency, so it's sort of puckering, and if you're not used to it, they've also got seeds that are a real pain to remove, but the seeds are, just eat them. You don't have to remove the seeds. So the fresh fruit of autumn olive is good. You can make jelly with it really easy. It doesn't take a lot of pectin. It's full of pectin itself. Or one of the coolest things I've seen is people have taken them, mashed it up, got the fruit like blended out real good, poured it out on a cookie sheet and dried it, and when it dried, it made fruit leather, like fruit roll-ups, and that's all you had to do. Put it in a low oven just to dehydrate it. Great snack. It's full of vitamins. It's full of lycopene, which is all the rage for treating heart issues, okay? It has more lycopene than tomatoes do. There's plenty of negatives, but that and the fact that it's a nitrogen fixer, so it actually helps beef up the soil a little bit. Autumn olive's got its advantages. Now, what I don't understand is why the birds don't eat it more. They eat a little of it, but it's very commonly for me to find autumn olive in January that's got 90% of the fruit still on it. I don't know why that is, because there's nothing wrong with it. But again, it's a hard one to beat. I have seen campaigns that have been successful in eradicating it on fairly small plots, several acre plots. It can be done. It's a lot of work. But if it's there's some decent use of it. One of the things that concerns me the most about autumn olive, I guess, is invasive, is in my experience, and this may not be what everybody's seeing, I'm seeing it be able to be pretty successful in areas of fairly low light. So it can form an understory as well as an edge plant. And that bothers me a little bit because it can, as long as there's just enough light to go, it'll function in areas that a lot of things won't. A lot of things want that edge habitat, and it's a little braver than most. Phragmites is kind of a issue. So, but Phragmites is also one of those things that really doesn't become a problem unless you've already got a problem. So disturbed wetlands, it does too much nitrogen, nitrates, it loves all that. And much like a purple loosestrife, Phragmites is pretty good for cleaning up gray water. It's a problem. Anybody here ever go to Charlevoix? You seen the thatched houses in Charlevoix? That's Phragmites. Okay, so all the houses in southern England, the beautiful little cottages with the thatched roofs that last 50, 60 years, that's Phragmites. So as a thatch plant, which we really don't use anymore, and I don't know why, it lasts about as long as a conventional shingle. It takes some labor, but you can raise them, you can get them for free. Sweat equity, and you got a roof. Besides thatching like that, you can use Phragmites with twining techniques to make real loose, like mats. And Phragmites is never quite straight. So if you twine together these mats, they all have gaps. They're full of little gaps. What Phragmites mats are great for is you dry things on them. They make wonderful drying racks. Now I know that's specialized. There's not a lot of people, but hey, you got herbs in your garden and you want to do something cool with them, well, go make a couple of Phragmites roll-out mats, throw your herbs on them to dry, and they'll do a great job, and you've just, you've learned a skill. And if you've ever twined anything together, it's easy. And once you've done it, people are all impressed, like, look how clever you are. You're like, of course I am. I invented this shit. So that's a pretty narrow use, but let's look at a little more of a bushcrafty use. One of the things I like to do with Phragmites, if I'm in an area with a disturbed wetland, I'll go cut a big pile of them, and I will bundle them up in roughly forearm diameter bundles. So 4 or 5 foot long, I'll chop them off, 5 inches in diameter, and I'll make 5 or 6 of them, and I'll twine them together with some twine or basswood bark. And then sometimes I'll take a second layer of about 2.5 inch diameter, and I'll lay them at the intersections so that it fills the gaps, and I'll twine them in. This whole thing takes a couple hours. When I'm done, I've got a fantastic camping mattress. And if I have a little extra time, I'll make an extra one, and I'll roll it up and I'll stick it in a hollow log somewhere. So when I'm tramping around in the woods and I don't want to go home, I can go pull a bed out of a hollow log, spend the night, be comfortable and dry and warm. And it was free. So I don't expect that most people are going to do that. I don't expect that most people are going to do that. But it's just a thought. One additional little cool craft thing you can do with Phragmites, in the West, along the big lakes that are like in Nevada, Eastern Oregon, Northeastern California, native people would take other plants like Phragmites. Generally, these are the tule reeds, but you can do it with Phragmites, and then make duck decoys with them. There's a way that you can fold up duck decoys, and they're cool looking. I've known more than one person that's had Phragmite or tule duck decoys just as home decor because they're neat looking. So yeah, little things like that are, you're immersed in these things anyway. You might as well get something out of it. Lesser celandine, is that a problem in Michigan yet? Yes. Okay, see, I don't see much of it where I'm at. It's a pretty good edible. It forms like little tubers. All parts of it need to be cooked. You don't eat them raw. You can eat the greens, they're not great. The tubers are pretty good. So that's a plant that's just a straight up edible. Also, this is a folk use. I have no idea if this is actually good or not. I haven't tested it, but the sap putting it on warts, it's supposed to dissolve warts. So, that's why they say to cook it. You don't eat it raw. Parsnip, wild parsnip. Wild parsnip and garden parsnip are the exact same plant. So the thing is that we normally notice the second year of the biennial with the big flower on it. And that's the part that we see. And, oh, it's that whole field's full of parsnip. Oh, woe is me. Well, the first year plants are the ones you dig up and get the roots out of. And if the soil is amenable to make a big root, they'll make a big taproot just like a grocery store parsnip. And that's something that we didn't eat when I was a kid. Our family didn't eat parsnips. I discovered them late in life, and I love them. So, also, if you're of a historical bent, parsnips filled the void in Europe before potatoes were introduced from the New World. So people used to eat, not only did they eat a lot more parsnips, parsnip vodkas were common, like basically because they didn't have potatoes yet. So the parsnip is a plant that's fallen out of favor, but the wild ones are the same as the domestic ones. The problem is that they can cause dermatitis for some people if you got sensitive skin. Well, wear a long sleeve t-shirt. You know, wash yourself good. Whatever you, or don't handle them if you're too sensitive. But they're a good, useful food product. They store well. You can dig them up in the spring. They can overwinter, and you can still have good food in the spring if you find them. So they can be a problem, but they're typically a satisfying, high-calorie food item. The next one, I had to see if it's considered an invasive in Michigan, and I'm not sure if it's official yet, but it's tansy. So tansy is very much a problem east of here. I saw tansy 20 years ago in upstate New York and in Quebec being a real problem for people. And then I came home to Michigan, oh goodness, there's no tansy, yay. And now all up and down the Lake Huron shoreline, you have tansies. Tansy, to me, it seems like it favors the North Country more. So wild parsnip and tansies like the same conditions. I don't see either one of them much south of Saginaw, but if I start getting up toward Alpena, I see them a lot more common. Tansy is an interesting plant. If you've ever smelled it, it's got a funky, sort of antiseptic or chemically smell. Well, that's the cool part. If you take that stuff, throw it in a big pot of water, simmer it, pour it through an old t-shirt, no bottle, it repels ticks. It's a real good anti-tick. It's real similar to permethrin, which is developed from a chrysanthemum. And if you smell it, if you smell tansy and smell a crushed chrysanthemum, you'll notice a similar smell, kind of like how birch bark kind of smells like burning styrofoam, right? So there's some similar chemical constituents, and if a strong tea or decoction out of tansies is bad news for ticks, and Lord knows we could use that. So I would consider, if I lived in an area where ticks were bad, I'd think about spraying the edge of my yard with it and seeing how it helped. So, buckthorn. I'm not going to go into a lot about buckthorn, but one thing I will say is it's a really pretty carving wood, and it tends to hold up well if you cut it green and like make a big spoon out of it. And if you're careful and don't dry it too quick, it won't crack so bad. Some woods are really bad for splitting as they dry. Buckthorn's not bad, and it's got some pretty color to it. And other than that, it's just, I don't know. Everybody's got to have wood fuel, right? So burn it. The next one is a lot of people also have issues with, and I'm going to show two uses that I've done with it. That's Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed, when it's in its meristematic period, like when it's still growing, generally this is before the leaves fold out horizontally. They're still clasping the stem when it snaps clean. Has anybody here eaten Japanese knotweed? Okay. What's it taste like? Rhubarb. Tastes like rhubarb. Yeah, and you can treat it just like rhubarb. You can, yes?
We made a jam with magnolia blossoms.
Oh, I bet that was good.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Well, I haven't done that, but go ahead and say that again, yeah.
We made a jam with it this year with magnolia blossoms and the knotweed, and it was fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Well, now, next time, try it with autumn olives.
Sorbet, too.
Oh, I bet.
Knotweed sorbet, phenomenal.
Has anybody, quick side jaunt, has anybody seen a show that was from the public television station out of Grand Rapids? It was on several years back. It was called Cooking with Angus. It was a local food show that they had a Scottish guy that was one of their professors in their culinary program. I did a show with him, and one of the things that we did was make shaved ices out of various things because it's so simple. And when he did it, I'm like, man, this is genius. This is such a big bang for the buck. It's so satisfying, and people like it. And, you know, very little work. But we made sassafras tea and sumac tea shaved ices, and that was a lot of fun.
I think we have one more question.
Yeah.
I heard it tastes like asparagus. Is
Which
that
one?
Japanese knotweed?
Tastes like rhubarb.
More rhubarb
Yeah,
like?
I mean,
Okay.
like, it tastes like
okay.
rhubarb.
Just make sure
It's-
you don't cut it after somebody's sprayed it.
Well, of course, yeah, you know, anything, or as my mom said, just make sure dog ain't peed on it. I never, ever bothered checking. I never asked the dog. Still here. One of the things I like to do with the Japanese knotweed, again, pretty specific. Back in the day, when we had a lot of alewives, lake trout, people called them greasers. Now, their diets changed because now they're eating another invasive. They're eating gobies instead of the alewives, which are pretty much died out. So they're not so greasy, and I think lake trout's wonderful. But in the past, a lot of people I knew would not eat lake trout because it was so oily from their diet of alewives. What I would do, I would take and make a lattice of Japanese knotweed in the bottom of a baking dish before I put my lake trout on top of it. And I'd bake it, and it would flavor up. It'd give like that kind of lemony little acidic tang into the fish, which is a great match. And the excess oil would drain to the bottom. I'd eat the fish. When I got done, I'd throw the Japanese knotweed out. And I had, what's the stuff that's in fish oil? The nutritional thing that everybody's crazy about. I had all the omega-3s you could ever want. Normally the cat got them. My cat had a great heart, I'm sure. But that was a great way to make use of a big, strong, pretty, beautiful, meaty fish. And it got rid of one of the objectionable elements, and I could, I'd just feed it to people and they'd love it. Oh, I'd never eat lake trout, it's greasy, but this is sure good, wink. The other thing is I shoot a black powder gun quite a bit, and Japanese knotweed makes joints like bamboo. And I would take and saw these off with a little saw and a Swiss Army knife. I'd cut them where they were cylinders with a bottom in them. So they'd be however long I needed them to be, one bottom closed. I'd measure my black powder, pour it in there, plug it up with a wad of patching material. So I'd put 5 or 6 of these in my pocket. If I took a shot, I'd have lead ball in one side. I'd grab my thing of powder. I'd crack it and pour the powder and the wadding down, and then on top of it would go the ball. So I made cartridges. This is pretty much what people did, especially in like the 15 and early 1600s when they were using matchlocks. If you ever see old art of guys with old school muskets, the ones that held the hot burning ember like a cigarette and they'd dip it into the pan, well, they would have belts with little cylinders on them, and that's what these were. They were powder tubes. So, it's a weird little thing, very niche-y. But it worked, and I made use of it, and I'm sure you can think of something else. And if you've got kids and you want them to bug your neighbor crazy, make panpipes with them or whistles. They're very effective at driving people crazy. We have a question?
It's kind of on the subject of Japanese knotweed. I think this is still pretty theoretical at this point, but I have heard people experimenting with actually eradicating it with pigs, letting them root where the Japanese knotweed is, and they are actually disruptive enough to get rid of it.
They will. Pigs and goats are the answer to all your problems, and they are also the source of the other problems. Yeah, well, one thing I forgot, too, Japanese knotweed is where they get resorcinol, which is a treatment for Lyme disease. So many plant-based medicines are real high-powered. Here's an example. I don't think that pokeweed is an invasive. It's a native plant. Pokeweed's root is very complex. There's a lot of chemicals in pokeweed's root structure. And huge. Yeah, and they're huge. But they have eliminated testicular cancer as a killer in men. So we talk about cancer treatment. Oh, they've never did that. Nobody really dies of testicular cancer anymore because of a common weed. And nobody talks about it, but it's true. So that's a big deal. The medication for breast cancer that's used a lot comes from yew trees. And for the longest time, they were having to debark yew trees, and they started killing yew trees by the thousands, and they're not super common. Then some bright young guy in, I think, Norway figured out that you can get the same amount, you can get the same medication out of the needles. So instead, they just started pruning them and making, it's taxanol, I think, is the chemical. And now they get that from the greenery in yew trees without hurting the tree in a big way if you space out which ones you're harvesting from. So there's a lot of people that do plant medicines that are, if I may be so bold, kind of woo-woo, There's a lot of people that'll tell you, the wood fairies told them which one to use. Well, every wood fairy I ever met was a notorious liar. But there are plenty of plain old white lab-coated scientists that find miraculous chemical structures in plants that we're around every day that work really well. Multiflora rose. Multiflora rose, I was hunting in Oklahoma once, and I had a brand new pair of Army fatigue pants. I just unwrapped them, put them on that morning, went in after a hog. It was so thick that it destroyed my pants that day, and I had scars on my legs. The way they had to get me out of the thicket, guy had like a 2.5-ton truck with a flatbed on it. He just backed the truck through the thicket until he was almost on top of me. I rolled myself up onto the bed, and he pulled forward because I wasn't getting out of that thicket. So I don't really love multiflora rose. But it is wonderful bird habitat. It's all roses, the hips are useful. By the way, if you might already know this, but if you're going to use rose hips for the flavor or the vitamin C content for tea, you do know to put them in a paper or a cloth bag first, right? Because the little hairs that are on the inside of those are that's what itching powder that you used to get from the back of comic books with your x-ray glasses and stuff. They had itching. That's made from the hairs around rose seeds. So they're not cool for your throat or your kidneys. So I like using rose hips. Put them in a little bag. Fold them up into a coffee filter is a good way to go with a rubber band. But so you've got this source of wintertime vitamin C in the rose hips. They smell good. They're lovely. One of the weird uses for them, well, two. If you cut the canes, and I know you've all probably cut wild rose canes and how long and arching they can be. Well, first of all, if you're making heavy-duty baskets like a clothes basket, they're nice and strong for big baskets that are going to take a bit of a beating. So if you know somebody that does basketry and you want a new clothes basket, wild rose is a good source. Okay, good, strong. The other thing is, when it dries, you can straighten it as it's green. And if you straighten it out every day or two, because it'll take the curve back and then you straighten it again, and then it'll curve back and you straighten it again. Each time is a little less. After a period, it sets up and it gets rigid, and you can have a straight arrow shaft at that point. So wild rose cane arrow shafts are really good for up to about a 50-pound or 55-pound bow. They are strong, they are stiff for their diameter, and they're fairly light for their in archery, they refer to the spine of an arrow, how stiff it is. Too soft of an arrow is not good. If it's too strong of a bow for the arrow, it'll blow up or it won't be accurate. So you want to match the stiffness of that arrow to the weight of the bow. Well, wild rose canes give you a good, effective hunting weight arrow that straightens easily. The problem is, when you cut them, you have to cut them pretty much at 90 degrees. If you cut them at an angle, like you would with a pocket knife, they'll split all the way in half. And it's better if you cut them square and then dip them in something that resists evaporation a little bit, which slows the drying time, but it keeps them from cracking. So you can dip them in a little bit of wax or even like Elmer's glue or anything like that. Just something to seal the end a little bit where they dry slower, because otherwise they're terrible for splitting. But if you do this, they're a fantastic arrow. I mean, I've got friends that are bow makers and make primitive or traditional style bows, flint points, rose cane arrows, and they harvest deer every year with them. So they work great. They come right off. Take the back of a stiff knife with kind of a square corner on the back edge, nice square back, and just go against the grain like you're scaling a fish, and the thorns fly right off. They're not even difficult to remove. By the way, things that are thorny, like in particular, I'm thinking of hawthorns. Anybody ever had a hawthorn stick in you? You know how they infect, they get all puffy and sore, they hurt like more like a cat scratch than like a, there's a reason that they're extra kind of ouchy and they get infected easy. They're covered with a variety of yeast that's designed to be painful. So they're not really poisoned, but those thorns have yeast on them and they make it fester. The cool part of this is if you've got one broke off in you and you let it fester for a day or two, it'll come out easier. It's, yeah, well, no, that's true though. Instead of digging out with a, you know, destroying a lot of healthy flesh, it'll push itself out. So the next one, I'm not sure if it's considered to be an invasive, so I'm going to ask the people that might know. Do they consider black locust invasive in Michigan? See, it's native though, isn't it?
It's native to like South Carolina, kind of coming up. I
So-
don't know how far north it gets, but
Okay.
it's not this far north, and it's invasive this far north.
So, two things. I believe you. But second thing is, you got to be a little careful with conventional wisdom on what's native where. You guys familiar with purslane? Where'd purslane come from? Middle East and Mexico. I'm not Mexico, sorry. Middle East and India, I hear a lot. I have worked in archaeological sites where we did core samples from lakes, where I have separated vast quantities of purslane seeds that predate AD 1200. People will say stinging nettle's not native. That's also not the case. And in the animal world, I've heard people say, well, red fox isn't native. That's a little tricky. There was a red fox introduction into the South. There were red foxes in Canada, roughly, and none in the Southeast, and then they introduced them into the Southeast from England. So there's two bloodlines of red fox in North America. The South has English bloodline, and the North has an American bloodline. The same animal, but the foxes, the little red foxes, like, yeah, I know, I'm all over the place. They'd have medicated me heavily if I was in school these days. So black locust was introduced by farmers for two reasons, and they're still good reasons. I mean, they're still perfectly valid things. Number one, it's phenomenal firewood. Number two, it's phenomenal for fence post. What else did they introduce for fence post? Well, Osage orange. Man, I was on an edible plant forum last year, and I had pictures, and I started calling them Michigan grapefruit. I had some people pissed. They were so mad. And I'm like, of course it's not a grapefruit, you silly goose. But there's a bunch of trees that are introduced for firewood purposes. Where I used to live in Northern California, red gum eucalyptus was an introduced species. They make a very big tree. People hate them because they drop branches like crazy. And in wildfires, if they get burning, they burn real, real hot. And they burn fast, so they spread wildfires. But why did they import them? Well, they brought them into an area that's full of redwoods. They didn't have any good firewood. So eucalyptus is great firewood, but nobody's using it anymore. If they kept it cut, it'd be fine, but they're not. Black locust, besides those uses, it is a phenomenal bow wood. It is, especially, let's say, from the Ohio River south, it was probably the preferred native bow wood for our Native Americans. They used a lot of things, but if they could get black locust in the east, that's what they used. The next one is one that, yes.
I was just gonna say, I have some slabs of black locust. It's really pretty.
Yeah, sure.
So it makes a very nice, like live edge type of wood.
Absolutely. Makes
And it's a very dry hardwood.
very hard. It'll eat up a
That's
saw.
all. I was just gonna say that about it. Yeah.
It's a friend of mine has made, what do you call them at the top of the fireplace? Mantles. He's made live edge mantles out of black locust, and they look really nice. They're heavy. Black locust flowers are, besides having the most heavenly smell, they're fine to eat. They're delicious. They taste like sugar peas. So if you're out on the road in May or June and you're out on one of the back roads and you come across the wonderful smell of black locust, pop a petal in your mouth, try it. But the superior one is not invasive. The superior edible flower is red buds. Where I'm at on the east side of the state, they don't quite come as far north. They die out in about Ann Arbor. Here, I think they come a little further up the coast. But red bud flowers are wonderful. Oh, imagine Imagine the best little sugar snap peas you ever had with maybe a spritz of orange juice on them. I mean, they're fancy. They're good stuff. So, mulberry. Is black mulberry an invasive yet? Is it listed? It's spreading like wildfire. Like wildfire. And 20 years ago, if I found in my wanderings, if I found a mulberry tree, I got a little excited. Hey, we're going to get some mulberries. I knew where all the mulberries in my area were at. Now they're uncountable, especially in urban and suburban areas. The most common tree I see at the edge of parking lots blowing itself through the asphalt along old fence lines are Siberian elms and mulberries. Now, yeah, well, and they will put up with conditions and that's why they're so tough, right? Have you ever eaten the little seeds that come up on them? They're edible. Yeah, good. Mulberry, there is a native species, and it's not common. I found a native red mulberry in the woods in Alabama this year when I was out tramping around. And I was excited enough that I took pictures and sent to a friend of mine who's over in Wisconsin. He showed me one in his area that was a wild. They have much bigger leaves. They don't look the same I mean, you can tell they're related, but there's a fair bit of difference between the native red mulberry and the black mulberry. And I'll tell you what, when I was a kid, like I said, or not even a kid, when I was in my 20s, I was pretty impressed to find a good fruiting mulberry. And now I mow them down constantly, just mowing the lawn. So they've hit some kind of a tipping point, probably with bird distribution. And as I was saying earlier, I'm amazed every white car in America doesn't have a mulberry growing out of it. And the last one I don't have a lot of great uses for. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Some of our Southwest Michigan wineries have mulberry wine. It's really good. Try it.
Yeah. Well, I was mentioning to someone else earlier today, I don't drink, but mulberry vinegar is really good. It's really good. Mulberry vinegar makes great salad dressings. Highly encourage you trying it. And again, I don't know if mulberry is considered an invasive yet, but it's got a couple of things going for it. One of them is that if you have a problem with too many mulberry trees and you've got a wood stove, it's a great firewood. It doesn't season fast. It takes a little while to get dry. Probably best in your 2-year stack, you know what I mean? And it's not the easiest splitting wood, but it's hot. It burns almost as hot, has almost as many BTUs as black locust. So it's superior to most of our oaks. It's a top-notch firewood for that kind of thing. The last one I want to talk about, well, actually there's two. Purple loosestrife. Real quick, purple loosestrife has a handful of medicinal uses. It's pretty strong antifungus. So like a wash for athlete's foot, purple loosestrife decoction, just boil the whole plant and use it as a wash. It's good for that. It's also an astringent, so people have used it on cotton balls for tucks for like hemorrhoids and things like that. It's a minor thing. It's not that useful. The best thing is for what it was actually put here for, and that's cleaning up dirty water. It does a great job of remediation of pollutions. But what do you do then? When all the pollutions are locked up in the loosestrife, what do you do with it then? So you can corral it, but it never goes away, right? The last one is, I lived with guys that were foresters and arborists. My crew was, half my buddies were arborists. And they taught me to really have a problem with calorie pears. So these decorative pears, sorry. The decorative pears, the calorie pears, they have a talent that people don't recognize. Yeah, they sort of suck. I get it. But they're a great smoker wood. If you know somebody that likes barbecuing, cut the calorie pears out of their yard, and when they get mad, say, quick, get a brisket, and give them the calorie pear wood. Tell them to get busy, and they'll be a lot happier after the end of it. So calorie pear is absolutely, it's just fine for smoking meat. And I worked at a commercial barbecue place. I ran a commercial barbecue smoker. So we curse it and everything else, but if you've got your choice between cutting a bunch of native black cherries and cutting a calorie pear, take the calorie pear. You won't mind the results at all. It's a good carving wood. It's pretty. You can make furniture and tabletops and stuff. It's not the most stable thing. You want to be careful with your seasoning. And you don't see very many of them that are all that big, but it's a great turning wood for things like that. But other than that, yeah, I'm more than happy to see them go into the chainsaw and then, smoke some chickens with it. So it's a win-win except for the tree. So are there other thoughts that you've had? Maybe there's plants that you wonder about a use for, or things that I don't know, any other general questions? Because I'm pretty much done. Go ahead. Wait one second.
wait.
Melissa's going to come around with a...
Thanks. So I was wondering, like the invasives that have been introduced from, say, Europe or Asia or whatever, did those plants, say garlic mustard, have something that kept them in check in their original location, or were they also invasive there?
Well, they're native to the areas they're native to. So the areas they're native to, they really can't be invasive, but they could be problematic. But from what I understand, that's not so much the issue. They had a balance point, and I would imagine, given enough time, things will settle out one way or the other, but we may not like the conclusion. So that may be an awkward answer, but...
I have another answer, and that is when I was in Europe at one point, I identified garlic mustard, and it blew my mind that there was, one or two plants, and it wasn't totally invaded. It's a normal plant over there.
Yeah, the conditions are such that if you want to do something entertaining, get yourself a book of useful plants or herbs or foraging or something out of England or France and read it. Because their take on things is quite a bit different, and a lot of the plants are similar but different. I'm a plant nerd, so to me it was really entertaining. So I've got a shelf full of European plant use books, and I find all sorts of stuff people in the United States never talk about. A good example of that is the big thistles. Thistles are a big forager's thing. They eat thistles a lot in Europe. They're perfectly fine. Almost nobody eats them in America, and they're just as good, but we just don't have a consciousness of them. Anybody else? I saw a couple of their hands.
Well, I have the microphone, so I'm just going to add that I just had thistle for the first time the other day. I'm a big fan of thistles. I had a bull thistle growing in my yard, and everyone's like, oh, no, get it out. And so I got rid of it before I knew that it was edible, and I grew native thistles. So now I've got pasture thistle, and so Cirsium and Discolor are the two that are in my yard. And the roots were delicious. I baked them.
They're
delicious.
not strong flavored. They're fairly potatoey. They're a neutral carb. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm curious about your mulberries. How would I know a black from a red mulberry other than if you compared the berries and you said one had a big leaf?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to look at a book, or I could show you a photo. But like where the invasive mulberries has like small hand-sized leaves, the native mulberries' leaves are 4 or 5 times larger. Yeah, and they'll have like the thumb on them. You know how some mulberries do in sassafras leaves, but they're much larger. You know how big pawpaw leaves are? They approach pawpaw leaf size. So there was another question, I think, over here, right here. Yep. Melissa.
I'd really like to know what to do with Tree of Heaven, the most inaptly named plant tree.
I have no idea. Two plants that I really can't find, I haven't found a good use for, and one of them is the smell puts me off. Tree of Heaven, and the other one is in the south, Chinaberry trees. I do not have a good use for either of those two. Are you guys familiar with Chinaberry? It's got little yellow fruits on it that look like, you know what horse nettle fruit looks like? Kind of like tomatillos without the husk, okay? And they're yellow, and they're poisonous. Things can't eat them. But that one and the Tree of Heaven are two that I have a hard time finding a little love for.
What about honeysuckle?
So there's a bunch of medicinal uses in Asian medicine for honeysuckle. I got to be careful how I word this. I'm ignorant of it, so I can't say that it's not effective. I haven't found honeysuckle to be anything that I find a lot of use for. One thing that I do find that honeysuckle does is it burns real hot and red. So it's kind of, you got a bunch of honeysuckle you cut, and it's dry, and you burn it. It makes a real pretty fire. But that's it. Yes, one in the back.
Back here? Yeah, thank you.
Is the tree of heaven the same as the staghorn sumac? Or are they different?
No.
Because I've never.
No, tree of heaven is ailanthus.
Okay.
The sumacs are native, really cool trees. Got some issues. I hate how sticky they make my hands, but sumac has got. I did like an article on uses of sumac. You like Middle Eastern food?
I love sumac. That's what I was
Okay, yeah.
I had never heard of
Tree of heaven is a common urban tree. It hasn't spread like into the woods so much, but you'll find it in old neighborhoods. It's around, and it's got real soft wood, and it breaks easy. So you'll see them storm damaged a lot. And the other thing is, besides the smell, I don't know. I don't like them. You have to look it up, but it's a very pale, even the bark. There's a lady right in the back too, so we don't want to forget her.
Well, I appreciate what you've said, and my heart is with you. I heard a story last night at KVCC, part of the series of talks there about the harvest by Roger Labine.
I was just thinking about him today. He's a friend of mine.
And Courtney.
Yeah, yep, good people.
And one of their creation stories I really like. Instead of God bringing all the creatures and all the plants to Adam and Adam naming them, Nanabojo, the Anishinaabe sort of Adam superhero
Cultural hero,
fellow,
right?
yeah. He goes around and the plants tell their names to him.
Yeah.
And the names that they give are keys, clues to what God put them there for, what the Creator put them there for.
Yeah.
Their uses, their importance to us and to the rest of the creation. And so our naming really is for our convenience.
Yeah.
Their naming is for the purpose that they were put here by the Creator.
Well, most folk names for plants, or many folk names, are the same in English.
Right.
They mean the same thing like that.
Right. So just pay attention to those
Absolutely.
names. And you begin to get a sense that everything is here for a medicine
Yeah, for
or
something.
for some other kind of use.
Tree of
And
heaven may be nameless.
is part of the culture.
Thank you. There's a lady in the back, Melissa. Okay.
No, Gail, you wait a minute.
So I just wanted to point out, since this hasn't become a problem in Southwest Michigan yet, but tree of heaven is the primary host plant for the spotted lanternfly.
Okay. There we go.
And so it
I
is
knew there was something wrong with that some
It's
bitch.
really evil. I used to live on the East Coast, so
Yeah.
I have witnessed spotted lanternfly infestations. It's horrifying. So
Okay.
please find something to do to kill your tree of heaven. Because if they don't find that, then they go for other things, but their favorite is
Right.
the tree
Thank
of
you. I didn't know that, and that's good news.
Yeah.
Or
Hi.
good info.
Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun listening to you. You seem like a great person.
I don't know about all that, but I'm full of bull.
I'm hoping you have a great use for woolly mullein because I have a lot of it on my
Oh,
property.
yeah.
And I invite everyone to come and take as much as you want for whatever uses. he
So
has.
mullein, real quick rundown. There's a lot. Mullein is, you have crappy soil, first of all. I'm going to say it's mostly like pea gravel, sand. Right. Mullein will thrive where nothing else will. So don't look at mullein as a problem. It's just doing like nothing else can live where it lives, really. That, well, spotted knotweed can, and you don't want that either. Mullein is one of my favorite plants to use for the spindle of making fire, the hand drill fire. I use mullein, and I use it on dead pawpaw, white cedar, any other number of soft woods for a base. The pith, if you cut a big mullein stalk and then cut the pith at an angle where the styrofoamy portion has sort of a sharp edge, you can take a spark from a rock and a piece of steel, and if you hit it with a couple of sparks in a row, eventually a spark will catch on that edge. It's the second spark to hit that place, because the first one microcharges it and the second one ignites it. So you can make fire with a flint and steel with a shaved piece of, it's not easy, but a shaved piece of mullein pith. The leaves of mullein, if you smoke them, and the way you smoke them is you take the leaf when it's fresh, you roll it from the tip to the base, and then tie it with a piece of sewing thread. So it's a cylinder, and then you can smoke it when it's dry like a cigarette. It is a bronchial dilator for asthma. It also is much like Benadryl, and it makes me a little sleepy. It doesn't get you stoned, as far as I can tell, or anybody I know, but it can make you a little drowsy. You can also mix it in other smoke mixes. If you take those same little rolled up cigarettes and you've got an old mussel shell and you got a bunch of deer tallow in it, you can stick 1 or 2 or 3 of those in there and light them, and they act as a wick, and they'll draw up through the middle, and they make great oil lamp wicks for improvised lighting. Is there anything else for mullein? Yes. No, the hairs are not your friend.
Sure.
Really. They used it for blush because it irritates the skin. Think about that. It's not.
Flowers in olive oil for ear oil.
You're right. My grandmother taught me that when I was a little boy. She had olive oil that she referred to as sweet oil.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
What's that mean? What does sweet oil mean? But she'd put mullein flowers and it would turn yellow when she used it as eardrops.
Mhm.
Correct.
And then also you can dip, like you can take the seed stalks and dip them in wax or tallow or whatever and make torches. out of them.
Right. Burn them up. Brenna, that's sometimes at these things. Brenna was doing that at an event.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say too. I actually did have a question, I guess, for everyone. Does anyone have a use for trumpet vines? Because that's my plant enemy.
In the Southern Appalachian tradition, there's a male use for trumpet vine, and we'll leave it at that. So, works great. I mean, according to a guy I talked to once. But some people will call it boar hog vine. Make of that what you will. So I do have a friend who's a real highly regarded herbalist in Alabama. I'll ask him for more details. His name's Daryl Patton, and he's got a book called Mountain Medicine, and there's a chapter on that in there, on the vine. And so there's an answer out there for you that's more than I know, but I know Daryl knows a lot about it. So, yeah. You guys know spiderwort? There's a book called, a guy named James Mooney in like 1902 went and visited the Cherokee in the east down North Carolina, and he compiled a lot of their ritual stuff and a lot of their plant knowledge in this big book. It's called like Spells, Songs, and something else of the Cherokee, but it's James Mooney. And there's a rather naughty use of spiderwort leaves, and I have a feeling that it was a practical joke that they were trying to play on him, because I think it's probably an irritant. And I just, I don't want to go into any details, but I think if he would have actually tried it, he would have wrote a whole lot more vociferously about it. So, but,
Yeah, I did 3 acres. I used to the Myers Gardens.
Yeah.
And I pulled 3 acres of garlic mustard.
Whew.
And
You did some work.
Yeah, but there's a point where invasives native. And there's so many pockets, even around Portage and Kalamazoo, where garlic mustard is just there.
Yeah,
And it's part of the landscape.
Yeah.
And that it's become more of a, because everything migrates.
One of the things that I learned, Waterloo State Rec area is around Chelsea, Michigan, west of Ann Arbor. If anybody's familiar with Waterloo State Rec area, they have horse trails. And wherever the horses went, there was huge amounts of, like the horses are very much a vector for the spreading of some of these things. Yeah, it was, you could see where the horse paths are, that the natives were having a problem. So, not that I mind horses, but it was really a wake-up call to see what a horse camp did to the area. Because they opened up new areas that were pretty pristine, put horses in there, and 2 years later, there was bittersweet everywhere.
You
It was
can
bad.
use butter, what am I talking about? Garlic mustard. The Nature Center has a book of how to cook with it.
Excellent.
I used to have one, but I don't cook much, so it's not very big, but it has lots of recipes
Excellent.
for using it. So
Good.
if you can find it, talk to the Nature Center, and maybe I should find mine and give it away, I guess, because I don't use it. But it's a really cool little book.
I have a question, maybe somebody can answer. So, there are not a lot of butternuts still around. I know where there's a few butternuts, and we're done, but there was a Japanese something that hybridized with butternuts and made what they call a heart nut. The problem is if you get those in the area, your genetics for your butternut are overwhelmed, okay? Does anybody know what that tree was? It was a Japanese something, and it hybridized with American butternuts. And I've seen the nuts that are, when you crack them in half, they're heart-shaped. So they're attractive, and they're still good to eat. But anybody here ever seen a butternut tree in the bush, in the wild? They're the sickliest looking things, and on their best day, they look like they're dying. They're just not a hardy looking tree, but boy, they're beautiful in food. But if I can ever figure out what this other tree was, because I could see that being a real problem for the few butternuts that we have around. Thanks for having me. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate you guys. If anybody is interested, my name's George Hedgepeth. You can always look me up on Facebook. That's my contact to the rest of the world. Just George Hedgepeth. It looks like me. The picture looks a lot like me, poor guy. And if you got any questions, you got any thoughts, hey, this is my thing. I love it. So I appreciate you, folks. Get out of your area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Yes, now? Okay. Anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. This was very, very enjoyable. I just want to remind you, and one of our officers was not here earlier when we introduced officers. Gail, you're hiding in the back, but there's our secretary who is leaving us, and we need someone to replace her. So anybody who would like to join us on the executive committee and become secretary for Kalamazoo Area Wild Ones, we would love to have you. We are also losing one of our at-large members, so we need someone to run for that office as well. That's it. I thank you very much for coming, and if a few of you could help put away some of those chairs, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. See you next month.